Actually, even that would be like something cool to put at the beginning of the video as like a clickbait thing.
Exactly. Yeah, for sure.
When you're like, now that we're recording, I'm like, we're recording? I didn't even know the cameras are on. How we're in.
I just discovered this term this weekend when we were in Vegas, but what we do is basically it's called a cold start, where you just roll into it. Because I don't really like doing like an intro, because I feel like it kind of just like puts the guests on the spot to get them as comfortable a lot of times. And even for me, like, people are like, oh, I'm here. Like, okay, well, I'd rather just be like more like we would just be sitting at a coffee shop.
Yeah, I like that. I just genuinely did not know they were on now. So we're like 30 minutes in. I'm like, is there like a start?
That's what it was like. We're getting coffee. It's just kind of talking.
Well, we had
sometimes we'd be like, just save this. Hold up.
What's your lifting like now? I guess we should be recording this.
Basically, like I was doing, it's kind of modified now because I had a couple injuries after the GP. So I hurt my ankle. I had an injury going into the GP, and then after the GP I left with like 2 other injuries, minor stuff, nothing crazy, but like I hurt my ankle in the final against Kainan. And then the next morning I woke up and I was like, man, I think I like pulled my back, but I didn't feel it that night. And I had hurt my back a couple times leading up to the GP, just kind of pulled it, tweaked it for a couple days, nothing crazy. And so I was like, kept on like, my back just felt super tight. Like anywhere that I would twist, turn, and move, it was just hurting. And then I did that thing in Phoenix, that seminar, and they had like an acai stand, and then they had like a couple little things there, and one of them was a physical therapist. So I was like, hey man, can you look at my back? And he's like, oh, I think it's your rib, it's not your back, which makes a whole lot more sense, because like getting in and out of the car, like that twisting motion, it's way better now. Like now I couldn't do like back rounds. Like if somebody was on my back, I would just compress my rib. So it was like a lower floating rib. It's still a little tender to the touch, but it's way better now. I can actually move and do stuff. But I was unable to do anything hanging. So like pull-ups, for example, I couldn't even hang from the bar.
Oh, wow.
Dips, same thing. Anything that was like pulling.
Okay.
Any like rowing motion, couldn't do that. Extension though, like for example, like RDLs was fine. Back extension was fine. Like reverse hypers, everything like that, fine. And then I've been nursing my knee because I've had a torn meniscus for a while.
Oh, okay.
And if I hurt it again at the AIGA, so it was it's a lot better now. But like for a while, I couldn't really do a lot of stuff with that. So I've just been having to kind of modify it depending on how I train, how I feel pretty much. So lately I've been doing like one exercise that I can do for legs that's kind of like more of a compound thing, because I haven't really felt that I could squat without hurting my meniscus. So I'll do Bulgarian split squats. That feels good, and it feels good on my ankle too, because it's not, for a while with my ankle I wasn't able to fully dorsiflex it, so like knees over toes was hurting a little bit, and now I'm like able to ease into that motion a little more.
Nice. Okay.
But I felt like I could keep my shin vertical in that position. So it's just basically like the guy that I'm working with now, like what I used to do, which was what I used to do was just push through it. And then what I used to do after that was trying to get a little bit smarter, was like I would kind of touch the pain and come back, touch the pain and come back, just to kind of desensitize my brain to it. And then basically he was like, as long as whatever you can do to like keep yourself training good is what makes the most sense. So like don't touch the pain. Like why would you want to feel pain? And so lately I've been doing that, and then occasionally I'll go in and I'll test it, and I'll be like, oh, my rib's feeling better in this motion, like it wasn't feeling this way like 2 weeks ago. Things like that.
Okay.
So that was a long way to answer that. It's like all over the place right now.
It's interesting. Because I wasn't sure if you changed your lifting style recently, or what you were doing strength training wise.
And he's been having me do more conditioning stuff on the off days, so it's usually about 3 to 4 days of like weights, and then because I have to do this big weight cut for ADCC, I'm doing some like steady state cardio 3 days a week, which is just, it's boring, but like it gets me burning extra calories. It just gets my metabolism going. And I try to change the modality of that. Like some days I'll do a bike, sometimes I'll just do an incline walk, and that gets my heart rate up really high. And I can like listen to something while I'm doing that. He also has me doing like kind of like cardiac intervals, like trying to get my heart rate down.
Oh, cool. Okay.
So things like that, which is like the stuff I hate the most. Like I literally just like going to the gym and lifting weight, like even warm-ups and stuff, like I just hate doing.
Yeah, I feel like.
But like I do now, I'm trying to do like I'll do warm-ups, I'll do like freaking rolling out and things like that. But yeah, I just like the lifting portion.
Smart, man.
Yeah. What about you?
So you're kind of, for me, it's predominantly kind of switched to bodybuilding-ish with my mobility stuff, and then just trying to get as athletic as possible. Also, like trying to build up even more capability in this knee from the injury.
Yeah.
So I've been doing a lot more running, having that translate over into the ring. That's been a big thing that I've noticed has actually helped a lot. Because after I came back from the knee injury, I went into Jiu Jitsu training and it started to feel okay, like wrestling and such. But then I noticed like just jogging longer distances, like it would start to compensate. So it's been a skill I've been working on more recently. And in the ring, it's just been feeling more capable to be able to like carry on long matches and stuff. So it's actually helped. And also the calorie burning aspect as well.
So when I first met you, you were doing primarily powerlifting?
Yeah,
like competitive powerlifting?
Yeah, for the most part, because I was training for, my last competition was, or preparing for that. Yeah. And then after that, like, at this point in time, there's no direct benefit or even need for that matter to want to continue pursuing it. I think I'll get more benefit out of really encapsulating what my character in wrestling is, which is trying to be really athletic and really flexible.
Right.
Yeah, and like tying that into the ring. Because I got to make up for height, as I was telling him, So if I'm like athletic but muscular but also flexible, then that's like some sort of a wow factor that appeals to an audience that can make me stand out more,
Yeah.
So that's really what my focus has changed to.
So is there a specific body type that they're looking for, like in the pro wrestling world? Like a specific body type that would do better than others? Because obviously like bigger is better, like they want more of like a more of a freak show, I guess, the better it is, but like is there something specific that they're looking for?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, historically, like the Hulk Hogan era and all that, like it's just like huge dudes like juiced out of their minds. But more recently, there's definitely a lot more variation to where somebody like myself that's a little bit more compact but has a physique can stand out as long as your character work is good. Like if you understand what character you are and like really get good at showcasing that, you could be more valuable than say somebody that's just really, really big. Yeah. So wrestling has changed a lot. And if you look at wrestling now, there's a lot more normal-ish looking people than there were, say, in the 70s, 80s, stuff like that.
Right.
So it makes it to where I never thought it was ever a thing that I would pursue because of that. Like I'll never be 6'5" or 7 feet tall or 300 pounds. But then once the dynamic change of what they're looking for, young, athletic, some sort of an athletic history, like, okay, I started to fit into this mold a little bit more. So then it became a little bit more appealing and I started to entertain the idea. And then now being immersed in it, I'm like, yeah, I think I can really do this. I just got to be able to paint who I am, like in the proper way to the right people.
Right. So how do you go about like figuring that out? And like, do you have people suggesting things, or is it more so like your own natural, you naturally kind of rolling into that character?
Yeah, a little bit of both. I knew that when I started that I wanted to be myself.
Yeah.
A lot of my stuff initially just comes from like wanting to be like Goldberg when I was a kid.
Right.
So then I kind of parlayed that into myself, a jiu-jitsu / really strong / physique / athletic guy that's just really, really intense but yet kind of soft-spoken, and just being able to like amplify that times 1,000 like in the ring and like what that means. So once you understand what your character is or what you're trying to show, then that's when the advice from coaches and whatnot, well, what if you try this? What if you do something like this? What if you say this? Whatever. Right. You kind of put bits and pieces together. Very similar to jiu-jitsu, except where jiu-jitsu is all very like physical and understanding like how to put your body in place. This is like acting and also the like what you say, like different things like that. Conceptually it's all the same, but like it's added elements that are a little bit different to think about, like when you're coming from pure grappling, Yeah. So
do you ever find yourself like as you're building the character, do you feel the need to like bring that character out when you come out and wrestle, or do you just embody that all the time? Like, like do you stay in character? Do you feel like that helps you, or do you feel like you can kind of like turn the switch on and off for when it's time to step in the ring, or even like when you're training?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So for myself, the reason why I think it plays in my favor is because I'm basically being myself, but as I said, it's more amplified. So instead of a switch, it's just kind of like elevate a little bit.
Right.
Yeah. And there's ways to kind of control that dial, even in the ring, like bring things up and then bring things down. And then it's just kind of like this wave that you bring the audience on to, whether you're winning or you're losing or whatever, you can like basically kind of walk the dog, aka the audience, into whatever you want them to see from your match. It's a very, very, very elaborate skill that I'm just now learning, but that's kind of the idea.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's interesting. Because I feel like you said now with like the body types, how it's varied. And I used to follow pro wrestling. I used to watch when I was like a little kid, but then I never really followed it that much. But I do know like there was, like you said, there was like the Hulk Hogan era and like you had all these guys that were all kind of similar.
Yeah.
Right? Like they were all really big, like muscular dudes and they all kind of talked in the same way.
Pretty much.
And then you got like this new wave of people. Like I remember, I don't know if she still does it, but like Ronda Rousey was in pro wrestling for a while.
Yeah.
Does she still do it?
No, she's not anymore. I don't think so.
But I feel like she had the persona before she became a pro wrestler, and it wasn't like she was this like pro wrestling like figure that like she was a fighter, but she had that pro wrestling kind of like it factor where she could like talk on the camera. She was like personable, like people liked watching her, and then she just brought that perfectly into pro wrestling without being this like giant meathead figure.
And that was so important for her because wrestling, they always teach you like we have to make them question if it's real.
Right.
Like everyone knows it's fake at this point, but you have to like hit those points where they're like, wait, was that real? Like that's kind of what you're aiming for. So with somebody like her or Brock Lesnar, it's like that it's real because they've proven what they can do in a real sense. So like you're already more bought in, and then anything that they do or say after that is like, well, maybe it's fake, but yeah, she could have done that in real life too.
Right,
so from a fan perspective, it's kind of interesting because subconsciously your brain interprets things that a certain person does over the other, and like you just believe things more. And for me, I have a little bit of that because of the background, not like UFC or anything like that, but there's enough out there of me doing real stuff to where like I can do legit things in the ring and then make somebody actually believe that, oh, he's actually pissed, or oh, he's actually trying to break his this, or whatever the case may be. Yeah.
Is there a do you feel like people coming from like a combat sports background are more so being funneled into that world? I guess it's not everybody that comes from a combat sports background or like a powerlifting background, but you wrestled growing up, right? Yeah. Do you feel like that's like an easier transition for the ones that have the actual persona that can carry into professional wrestling? Yeah,
moveset wise, yes, for sure. Because a lot of the movement outside of just amplifying things is very similar, even takedowns or hold. The thing that WWE looks for a lot now is like pretty much college athletes coming straight out of college. Like the people that don't get into the pros or maybe had a very short pro career, that's who they're actually kind of like trying to target for the most part. So it's actually nowadays for the WWE less about your experience in wrestling, like going through the ranks, and a little bit more about like what your athletic potential is, because they trust that their coaches over there at their training center can train anybody up, but it's a matter of like, can this person perform in the way that we want them to?
Yeah.
And then the big gray area is now, can that really athletic, capable person physically match the promo side of things, the character, the acting, the ability to talk, the ability to kind of encapsulate an audience.
Yeah.
That's the side of things where I think makes or breaks people.
Yeah.
Because the physical moveset appeals to like a small sector of the wrestling fan.
Yeah.
But then the majority want that, they want to follow a TV show, you know? So that's like what you really have to be good at, because the promo cutting makes it to where you can do way less in the ring, but still keep a audience engaged, whereas there's a lot of people that do a lot of really fancy and also really dangerous stuff in the ring, almost to make up for what they can't do on the mic.
Right.
And to me, I feel like I at least want to find this happy medium between doing cool stuff in the ring that's still safe, that will allow me to have a long career, but also be able to talk in such a way that doesn't force me to have to like backflip off a ladder and then whatever.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, I'd rather not do that. Like one of my clients for AEW, which is like the competitor brand, he did this spot not too long ago. He just came back, but yeah, basically like he was on top of the ladder, and then this guy had him like underneath his legs, and they both like backflipped off the ladder, and like I don't know how they expected the spot to go well, but like my client landed like this, and basically his ankle like was facing that way. Somehow he didn't hurt his knee, but he just broke his ankle completely. Yeah. But yeah, just crazy spot. anyways, but yeah, just stuff like that.
Yeah, for sure. I feel like there's a lot more freak injury involved in that than like lifting weights.
Right.
Or it's more like wear and tear.
Yeah, exactly.
So what did you already know you didn't want to compete in powerlifting? Like, had you already decided you wanted to do WWE or pro wrestling before you stopped powerlifting? I know you still lift and stuff, but like competitively.
Yeah, so I always hit these stints in powerlifting where I think I'm not all that strong, and then I do something like, oh, okay, that went pretty good. What if I like train for a little bit and I sign up for this meet, and then have like down the meet prep, I'm like, I really don't like this all that much, but I'm already like committed to it, so I just kind of follow through. Yeah. That's kind of what happened in the case of this past meet that I did, where I signed up for it. It's a really big meet, so like when you qualify for it with a specific number, then once it opens up, it fills up really fast. They actually opened it like a year and a half in advance. And so I had signed up for it. This was like shortly before my knee injury. So the majority of that prep was me just basically recovering my knee. And then by the time I moved to Austin almost a year ago, that's when I started actually kind of like prepping for it because my knee was capable again. And then, yeah, during that time, I had already kind of started my training and networking for wrestling. So I knew that that was really the big and long-term goal, but committing to this competition, that's what I was like training for in the gym. And then after the competition, once that was done, then it was just like, okay, now like I'm free slate. I don't need to do powerlifting. Like I'm pretty content with what I lifted numbers wise. You know, I had a big goal to move 800, so I did that. And then like once that was done, like I'm kind of content in that area.
Yeah.
And then after that, it's like, okay, well, what is really going to benefit me right now in the gym that's going to help make me the best character that I can be? And that's going to be like building my physique on top of what it is now, being able to do crazy flexible things that most people with my build can't do, and then just being really athletic to be able to keep up with the guys that are smaller than me, but then be able to stick out in regards to the guys that are like similar to my build, to where like you could take somebody and they might have this over me, but I'll have like 1 or 2 or 3 things over them type of thing. So just increasing my overall appeal to where I showed potential. And so somebody in a bigger role could look at me like, oh yeah, I can mold that guy, you know, that type of thing. And then on top of that, the networking side of things, which is a whole other aspect that I've been working on myself too.
Yeah. So in powerlifting, I don't really know exactly how the tournaments are set up, but like obviously there's weight classes. And then so when you're going in there, like are you ahead of time writing down like the number you're trying to hit, or is it just kind of you tell them how you feel like right before the lift? Or because I saw in that last meet, I don't remember exactly what you deadlifted. It was like 7 something.
Yeah, 717. Yeah.
But like prior to that, you had pulled 8 in the gym. So like how are there's like, is there the gym goal versus the competition goal? And like, I don't know, for me personally, if I lifted 800 and then I lifted like 700, I'd be like, what the fuck, did I get weaker? For sure, but like, it's still a shit ton of weight. So how do you set those goals to where like, if you lift 800, why are you going into a competition trying to hit a lighter number? I'm just curious, as opposed to trying to beat that number. Yeah,
so that's a great question. So I made a joke about this on like the post of that competition, being able to hit 800 in the gym versus 717 in the meet. There's like the gym PR lifter that posts about like their PRs in the gym. That's like more me versus like the guy in competition, whether you can like keep up with that number or not. Right. And then deadlift specifically, there's a few variables that kind of alter that. So when I deadlifted the 800, it was on just like basic pound plates, like metal plates. The pound plates are going to be a little bit thicker. So with the deadlift bar that bends, you'll get more bend out of it, aka a higher starting position. So if you're cheating the deadlift with sumo like I do, then you can essentially lift a little bit more weight because the thickness of the weights itself make the bar bend. So you can leverage your hips a little bit more, get a little bit more upright, range of motions decrease, all that stuff. With the competition though, they're competition style plates, so they're really thin ones, so the bar doesn't bend as much. So that in itself probably takes off a good 30 to 35 pounds for me in particular.
Okay.
And then on top of that, for that meet in particular, I went for a 717 because I knew I knew second and first was out of reach. So I just want to make sure that I medaled, period, at that point. So I knew I had to hit 717 to medal. Okay. So then at that point in time, it was just about like where I finished in the meet. So I knew I could get 717. So that's what I put on the bar. And the way it moved, I probably could have like squeezed out maybe, I don't know, 740-ish or something like that. But the other thing to take into account is that deadlift 800 was like only deadlift that day, like that's all I did, versus like a full meet where you're squatting heavy and then benching and then deadlifting 3-4 some odd hours like deep into it. There's different variables where you have to kind of account for. So like in a perfect world, yeah, you go for 800 and, you know, call it good. But at the same time though, with that one in particular, it's like, okay, well, do I want to like get risky and risk not placing and then just be upset about that, or just guarantee the play? Because I had to compete in powerlifting for about 4 years before that, and that was like basically outside of one of the top organization that also is known as one of the best meets that you can do. So I, for my own accomplishment, I just wanted to at least medal for that one, acknowledging that, you know, I don't compete in powerlifting all too much, so to medal in one of the top drug tested meet is like a good thing to kind of mark off of my resume and then kind of move on. So that was kind of my main goal at the end of that, because my bench, I went 345 or something like that, and I got it up, and then I went for 374, and I got it up, and my butt came off the bench slightly, so I missed like 30 pounds, you know, in my total. So then at that point, do I try to make up for that with a big deadlift that I might miss, or do I like kind of take the safe route? So there's things like that in powerlifting that you try to take in consideration to make sure that you at least like finish where you want to.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Plus, because if you miss, you probably take so much out of your tank that you can't hit. You can't make up for it like on a second go, right?
Exactly. Yeah, because you can't drop weight. You can only go for the same or go up.
I see.
Yeah. So for that one, if I had missed, then it's like, yeah, and I went like dumped it all, then you also risk bombing out of the meet too. So if you fail on your first, then fail your next two, then you're just disqualified in general. So you always want to start safe. And to answer your original question, you come into the meet telling the person like what your opening attempt is, and generally the thing for an opener is you want to pick something that you could hit a confident 3-ish reps with, and then build up from there, so that even on your worst day you're at least going to be on the board. And then you kind of pick your attempts after that depending upon how the weight's moving in the competition.
I see.
Yeah.
Okay. Can you go in and just do one lift, or do you have to always do 3?
There are options to do bench only and deadlift only. They kind of have a negative stigma behind them because it's just not as cool, I guess. That's like the thing in powerlifting now. But yeah, you technically could just do those two. Okay. Yeah, but the big meets are like all full power, squat, bench, deadlift.
Okay, I see. Yeah. Because I know deadlift is kind of like your favorite.
For sure.
Mine too, also.
Yeah, hell yeah.
So I wasn't sure if you would go in and just do deadlift meets, or if it was like full power meets.
Yeah, when I first started, I did. But that was also a different era of powerlifting. This was like 2014, 2015, so straight out of high school. And it was the Arizona powerlifting community, which, with all due respect, is like maybe a few years behind where everyone else is powerlifting-wise. And so deadlift only meets and different organizations that aren't all that known across the United States are actually pretty big in Arizona. So where I started, I just kind of followed where I would kind of point it in the direction of going. And then once I got a little bit more aware of what the powerlifting scene was looking like in regards to like the people that were my age coming up, then we started trying to do more meets that would rank me well or just look more validated on a scorecard or whatever.
Sure.
It'd be the equivalent of doing Naga Worlds versus, you know, ADCC Worlds or something like that.
Yeah, I got you. Yeah. So like when you first get into lifting, what's your kind of like long-term goal, or did you even think that way when you were like first starting off? Like for example, this tournament the last one that you did, like how long were you eyeballing that? Like, you know, was that like a long-term goal, or is that something that was kind of like spur of the moment, like you wanted to get it out of your system?
Yeah, that one in particular was kind of a spur of the moment thing, because I know it's a really big meet and it has a lot of hype to it, and it's probably top, I don't know, 2 or 3 meets that you can do in that powerlifting scene. And so when I saw that I had a qualifying number for it, I was like, well, okay, I mean, I'll do that. That's cool. It's not something that I have this burning passion for. I have a passion for lifting and strength training and all that, but I don't know if I have a passion for powerlifting. It's just that powerlifting is the most relative sport that kind of bleeds off of that.
Sure.
So when I started lifting when I was 5 with my dad, we started doing basic bodybuilding movements, but also some with emphasis on strength. So he was having me focus on progressing like a squat week to week, or a deadlift, or a curl, or a pull down, or whatever. And then building that foundation of strength really early on obviously allowed me to be a little bit stronger than what my peers are. So then in high school, I remember going for the school squat record, and then I got it, and I was like, okay, I like this. So then that's what made powerlifting seem cool to me at the time, because I was just basically chasing records. I looked up records for Arizona and then the United States at the time, and I chased a handful of records for Arizona, and then I did a few national records and a few world records that don't stand anymore because there's a lot more freaks out there now. But at the time, it was cool just to kind of like test my strength against my peers or my age group and chase records, and that's kind of where I got my start in powerlifting. And then once things kind of went on, my story goes, I started powerlifting like out of high school, so I was 200, 205. I wrestled 195 in high school, and then doing 2 years of powerlifting, I basically, as I was talking about earlier, ate like shit for 2 years, so like fast food nearly twice a day, and I went from 200 to 270, like chub, like complete like fat.
Like a thick boy on Instagram, like that's the same guy.
Like, I don't know if I actually added on muscle during that process, because when I cut it all off again, I got back down to 190, and outside of maybe my physique looking a little bit different, like there's no like size increase at all. It's just like fat gain. So then after that, I was like, yeah, I don't really like this. I want to get back to my grappling athletic style shape. So that's where I started jiu-jitsu. I started jiu-jitsu basically to help me lose weight, because I didn't like doing the incline treadmill and cardio like that. Yeah. Maybe I'm mature enough to do that stuff now and be okay with it, but back in my early 20s, I just didn't want to touch it. Yeah. So that's when I started jiu-jitsu, and it was cool because the way my high school wrestling career ended, I was number one coming into state my senior year in Arizona, and then after I moved up a weight class, it was basically between myself and the returning state champ, and then 6 days before state, I had a major concussion. I couldn't wrestle, and everybody that I beat second through sixth place had placed, and then the person that was a returning state champ had won. Anyways, I had this big goal to win state my senior year. That didn't happen because of the injury, and when I started jiu-jitsu, I was like, oh, maybe this is like my second chance to kind of like advance upon those skills that I had in high school. Yeah. I loved wrestling so much that I wanted to find something that could parlay. And once I started jiu-jitsu, I started training the same way I did back in high school, 2-3 sessions a day, as you were well aware of. And then I lost a bunch of weight. Yeah. And then since then, I've only gone up to like 245 one time when I was chasing 800 on conventional for deadlift. And then I broke into the 700s for raw squat. But then after that, I started like a 10-week cut for 99 under for the ADCC East Coast trials that you won. Okay. And then ever since then, I've stayed right above 200 or a little bit lower. Yeah.
Do you feel like when you bulked up the second time to the 245, you were able to maintain more muscle?
Yeah, I definitely feel as though I added some legitimate muscle during that process, mostly because I was training jiu-jitsu still like twice a day. So I was eating like shit, but I was training a lot. So like I was putting on fat, but not 70 pounds of it, more like 40 pounds of it.
Right, yeah.
And so anyways, nowadays I have a much better idea of what I should be eating to maintain my strength and then also maintain a certain look. It just, to me, back then, I think from a dieting standpoint, just very like immature. So I could push my mental fortitude to be very focused for X amount of months to lose a bunch of weight, but then not have the foundation set up to where I could actually maintain that style of eating. Yeah. And now being almost 28, now I have a good sense of that because I've been able to maintain 200 for the last 3 or so years now. But prior to that, it was always up, down, up, down, up, down. And if I was doing a cut, it was at least 20 or 25 pounds. It was only after I started powerlifting to where I started making it worse for myself, having to drop 70 or 45 and just make the whole process much harder. Yeah. So anyways, I'm going on this to say, like, if you want to do like a cut, it's going to be much easier, as mathematics would suggest, to just lose like 10 pounds as opposed to 70. Yeah. I know this is world breaking news.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I feel like you're like you said, like you're not really gaining that much muscle, gaining 70 pounds, just gaining 70 pounds of fat for the sake of it.
And then on top of that point, it's like if I'm losing 70 pounds, maybe I did add some muscle, but think about the deficit that I have to stay in for that amount of time to be able to get back down to like a 200 or 190 weight. So then inevitably I'm probably losing some of the muscle that I put on during that. So it's just in relation not worth it at all whatsoever, on top of like stretch marks on my lats that I still have 7 years later. Yeah. So yeah.
What would you do differently if you wanted to, like, I guess you're 270, but like you're not trying to sustain 270. Like what would be an ideal amount of muscle that you would want to gain? You were starting at 200. So like what would you have wanted to get to if you could do it over again?
Yeah, like, so what I should have done was make 198 like my respective weight class, and then make a mini cut 10, 15 pounds to get to 198, and then work on building strength and sustainable mass between the 210 to 220 area. That's what would have been the better option from a pure powerlifting standpoint. Now, like back then, it was back then, you hear these stereotypes about powerlifters and, their rest times and eating candy between sets and, eating whatever because you got to be able to lift heavy, and like all of that was very true, at least where I started. That's like was actually suggested to me, like do this. And then now I look at some of the suggestions that I got, and I look at it now being 28, and it's just so bad. Just very, very not that ideal. So I was a lot of times following what I've been advised from the people that were more experienced than me. And nowadays it's so easily proven that you don't need to eat a ridiculous amount of calories to put on strength. Definitely not a ridiculous amount of junk food to put on strength, or the difference between candy and fruit. It's just like, well, why can't I just eat fruit because it's healthier? Like, no, candy, like you want that fast acting sugar, I don't know, just like it's funny because the fitness industry like that in general still has those trends to this day where this is really hot and this is really bad, but this was once really, really smart to do actually, but now it makes no sense, and it just always rotates. Ultimately, it just comes down to you piecing together the pieces of the puzzle that you find will work the best for you, which is cool because I see you do that a lot for your training, whether it's your strength training for jiu-jitsu or your jiu-jitsu as it is. Like you just piece together what really works well for you, and you have a good understanding what that is. Yeah, for sure. I mean, especially with strength training for jiu-jitsu, or like even nutrition and all that stuff. Like this is the first time this last I don't know, even 6-7 months that I really put like time and effort into like my nutrition overall, not just like thinking about what I'm eating when I'm cutting weight, but just year round, like what I need to do to like maintain a certain, like a certain body weight, because obviously I compete in a body weight competition, but also an aesthetic look in the mirror that like I'm like, okay, I don't think I look like a piece of shit, like I think I look good, but also I'm not like super lean. Like that's one of the things that happened to me. I was getting too lean and I started picking up injuries really quickly. So it's like I needed like to be lean enough that I feel like I looked good. I had enough muscle that I was strong, I had enough strength in the gym, but I wasn't injuring myself because like I'm not a physique competitor. So even though I do, I like that world. I like that world. Build, man. That's something that I struggle with too, is because I want to put on more muscle, but like right now I'm like forcing myself to stay smaller. Whereas like I think in a couple ADCCs from now I could go up a weight class and like really gain some muscle. Because I have the frame for it. Like I have really long arms. Like I could put a lot of muscle on my arms and legs, but I don't know. Even Mark Bell was saying that when I went out there to his podcast. He's like, you have long limbs. We could slap a lot of muscle on there. Just clay mold me. But yeah, because I do really enjoy that world. Like literally my favorite movie since I was a little kid was Pumping Iron. Like I watched that movie like 50 times. Damn, that's awesome. And so much so that Rebecca, when she hung up my ADCC medal, she hung it up on a shelf, and right next to it she put the Arnold Pumping Iron thing, because she knew that I loved that. But yeah, so like the last 6 months, that's when I was really like starting to pay attention to that, because before it was just like you said, like I would go into a cut and then I would focus on what I would eat, and then outside of that I would just eat, whatever. And it wasn't necessarily unhealthy, but it was just like not a sustainable swing, you know what I mean? Whereas now I could feel like I can be a lot more consistent with it. Like I basically know within like a 2-pound range what weight I'm going to wake up at every single morning, and I'll know like, oh, if I ate this, I'm probably going to be a pound heavier. If I ate this, I'm probably going to be a pound lighter. If I trained a certain way, I can kind of gauge that. Whereas like before it was like every day was just kind of like a toss up, you know what I mean? And then I found myself like unhealthily checking my weight like 17 times a day. Oh, really? Yeah, because I was just like, what's my weight? Oh, if I drank this cup of water, I gained 2 pounds. Fuck. And it's just like, it's not. So now I just like check it every morning. And I'm just looking for that kind of average. I see. You know? Do you write it down, or you just kind of keep track in your head? I write it down now because, like I said, I started working with a guy. So I have we share like a spreadsheet. Okay. And I'll just put in certain metrics that he wants to see. Like, my weight's one of them. And then a bunch of other stuff.
But like just to make sure that I was tracking. And that's really why I hired somebody, because I just wanted to take like the guesswork out of cutting weight. That was like, for me, it was the main thing. And you know, I plug in like my lifts and stuff like that too. Even when I have to modify the program, I'll like, you know, make sure that everything's kind of being monitored for. But yeah, it's a game changer, I think.
That's cool.
When you figure that out.
That's basically what I do with my clients as well. Like, I have them plug in the stuff. I think it's very helpful. I was going to say, your diet that you post about, whenever I see your post, we eat pretty similarly as far as food choices go. I personally find that style of eating has been the most sustainable for me, because I find that dieting in the past, from like what I defined it as, just like eating food that you don't like to eat, where sustaining a diet or sustaining a healthy lifestyle is having those healthy food choices that actually taste good, so you look forward to eating it, so it's much easier to stay on track there. Because before, I would go cold turkey with like 99 lean ground turkey and you know, vegetables, and just taste like nothing. So there was always a means to an end, and then that's why I would swing so hard the other way, because mentally, again, just immaturity, but mentally I knew that I was going to go back to that cold turkey, so might as well just live it up now. And then my genetics, Filipino genetics, just like
you just get plump, man.
Randy knows about that.
Exactly.
I did have a question as far as like, walk me through like how you learn programming. Like you mentioned you worked out with your dad in the garage kind of thing. Who were the coaches that kind of really brought you along, where you saw the theory of it? Like what did you read? Who did you follow? Like how did you fine tune your programming now? Like how did that all lead up?
Yeah, that's a great question. So like I said, I started lifting with my dad when I was young. So that was predominantly, just basic progressions of progressive overload. As long as you're not just an idiot, like you should probably have that to some degree, and it doesn't have to be written on paper. So even as a 5, 6, 7-year-old, we were having a very light version of progressive overload, like, add 1 rep each week or whatever the case may be. And then I did that from age 5 up until about age 14. That's when my dad stopped lifting, and then I started taking over my own training. And then as a 14-year-old that you let off the leash, I didn't even know what the hell I was. I mean, like, I was like lifting and trying to push hard and stuff like
reading
that.
Magazines and stuff. What are you getting your?
Yeah, I wasn't following any program, that's for sure, brother. But but anyways, and then when I was 15, I started to try to take a little bit of a coaching role. I started training my 2 best friends that co-own House Strong with me, and then that's where I started getting a little bit of coaching experience in the lifting field. In regards to your particular question, I had gone about it my own way for so long, and then like I said, when I first started powerlifting, the concept of programming was actually talked down upon, like to where like you're just like literally maxing out in some way, shape, or form like every single week. And like that's when I was introduced to powerlifting. I was young, so I literally just thought that that's what it was. I still have sciatic issues from that way of training to this day. And so anyways, and then all of a sudden a few years into it, you start hearing about programming. And like I said, where I came from powerlifting Arizona, like the concept of programming was like almost taboo. Like people talked about programming, but it was like, you know, in the moment, like nobody ever actually like followed it.
So like Eddie Cohen, the West Side Barbells of the world, they're just like, oh, whatever, just lift heavy? Or
no, not those people. Just like, I'm not trying to like X out anybody, but just like, let's just say like where I started, like just they weren't following those principles. So I was just kind of following the lead of those that I was around. And so anyways, and then I started hearing about programming and such like that. And I had a few people back in Arizona that were doing it that gave me some advice, and I just started basically implying basic principles of like progressions into a powerlifting competition. But then after that, I went 2, 3, 4 years basically doing my own programming, my own training, until I picked up a coach that is still a good friend to this day. His name is Dawson Wyndham. He's a big powerlifter. And I've never worked under a coach legitimately like that before, as far as like what he's talking about, like spreadsheets, like numbers, like tracking, video feedback, like all that, like that whole process. And so anyways, when I started that process, I started to realize how much I didn't know, because it was interesting, because this particular person at one point in time when he was a teenager, he's a little bit younger than me, I remember him commenting on my Instagram asking for squat advice. And then all of a sudden, fast forward 3, 4 years later, he's done all this work to learn all this stuff about programming and coaching. Now he knows more than me. So that was like a little bit of an ego hit where like, damn, I need to really like get my head out of my ass and like be a little bit more open-minded and learn. So I used working with him as a way to understand programming, obviously like his style of it. and then also learning things about different exercises. That's when I started going down all these various rabbit holes on mobility and programming and strength and all these different things that I dive into nowadays. So I credit him a lot into sparking the interest into wanting to know more. And then that led into now, what does programming mean in mobility and strength and bodybuilding and powerlifting or conditioning or whatever. And you start to learn that conceptually it's really not all that different. Yeah. And if you just understand what the specific goal is, you can cater things, make a few switches, and it's all basically the same at the end of the day. You're always going to have some sort of progression, or if you need to, regression, and then you just know how to build upon that. It's really not all that hard of a job per se. It's just understanding where the same concepts apply. So like translating into jiu-jitsu, he's so good because he has such a vast understanding of concepts. So if he's faced with a situation in jiu-jitsu that he's never actually practiced before, he knows that he's so conceptually sound that he just applies that same concept into that situation. So it's that kind of the same thing for programming. You might have a client that wants something that you've never actually like coached before per se, but conceptually, you know that you apply the same principles and you can elicit kind of the same results. So that's where I gained a lot of my knowledge from. And then there's people such as Phil DeRue and Knees Over Toes guy and Mark Bell and a lot of those guys in that field that I've learned a lot from just by watching their content. Dr. Mike's a huge one nowadays. I really like his content.
Great stuff. I like his stuff
a
lot.
Yeah, I love it. Yeah, and he's obviously hilarious, so it's like entertaining at the same time. So a lot of that stuff. Jared Feather, his partner, is phenomenal too. So anyways, I didn't go to school for this. I went to school for business. So a lot of my knowledge outside of just 23 years of experience has just been from consuming a lot of information and then trying to find a way to directly apply it. I think a lot of times nowadays with how social media is, there's a lot of information that's like really, really good that most people see, but not many people digest it or apply it right away. So it's like one ear out the other. Yeah. But because of my profession, I try to see these things, apply it right away, whether it's to myself or my clients. And then you kind of make that little like notch in your brain and then it kind of sticks. So that's where, if I'm giving advice to the listeners, like if you're watching fitness content, you see something that's really valuable, don't just be like and move on. Like actually apply it as fast as you can, because that like adds to your bank of knowledge that you can apply to yourself, or if you are a coach working with others. But that's where I think I've been able to get a broader range of programming understanding.
Cool.
Yeah. That's good too, because I kind of like nerd out on stuff like that, and I think it's really interesting. And that's kind of a struggle that I have with jiu-jitsu training, because we don't really have like a season or like a mapped out, calendar, right? I mean, we know when ADCC is going to be roughly, like it's going to be sometime in the fall every 2 years, but like there's a bunch of stuff over with a bunch of different organizations, so it's really hard for me to actually periodize training and make sufficient gains, not just in the weightlifting room, but in even the context of jiu-jitsu, because you can really periodize your jiu-jitsu training if you really dive deep into that. And so I'm super interested in like Russian and like Eastern Bloc style training, because I feel like they 100% were ahead of the curve in that stuff. And I think you're kind of starting to see that, like you were talking about how like in the American style of powerlifting, there was just go. Yeah. You see that a lot in the American style of wrestling too, especially like high school and college. And then you go to like these Eastern countries, like, not just the Russians, but like all those like kind of Chechen and like all the Caucasus region countries, and they have just this like program since when the kids are like little, and they just like, this is exactly what we're going to do to make these guys monsters. Whereas you see in like the Western style where it's more like, let's just push, which I feel like you were talking about, right? Like I feel like you kind of need that barrier to entry to see, because these days, both in jiu-jitsu and in the fitness world, and like people are just trying to get in shape and get shredded, I feel like too early are looking for too much nuance. And it's like, what's the one little thing where you really don't have to work that hard, that's going to make all the difference? Whereas like, dude, at some point you just need to push long enough to where now you're actually able to, and even me, I'm able to actually make a minor change somewhere, and it has this like ripple effect, like magnitude of difference. But you don't see that early on. And like even in grappling, like these days now, where I like, I'm kind of like I'm experienced enough of a grappler that people are like, oh, this guy's like, you know, a veteran, like he's been in the game for a while. And I see like young guys coming up and they're like looking for every little way to get around just the fucking grind. And it's like, you need to do that first. Like I would much rather have an athlete or a training partner that I have to pull back from training than try to convince them to train more. And I feel like it's very rare that you find that. Like when I was young, like I would have like coaches and black belts in my gym telling me to train less.
Really?
Yeah, like you need to train less, you need to rest more. And it's like nowadays is where I have to kind of like really I really have to pay attention to those minute details because I want longevity in my career, whereas back then I didn't think about that. But like I wouldn't take that away. I think if I had to do it differently, I wouldn't do it differently because, you know, I needed to do that in order to get here. You know what I mean?
Yeah, totally. I think that's an amazing point because like all those extra training sessions built that foundation to where now later in life where it matters to me probably a little bit more, you can take off and probably benefit from it. But you've already paid your dues in that sense. And that's kind of how I feel from the lifting side of things as well, where I've lifted for so long. Like I'm 28 and I can say I've done something for 2 decades. It's that. So at this point, like taking a rest or like backing off a little bit can benefit me, but it's like you have to earn yourself to get to that point, because if you're looking for those things early on, you're missing out on that mental conditioning or that mental strengthening that will allow you to like go from here to this 20 years down the road, which is really important because building muscle or building strength is really not all that difficult or tricky at the end of the day. It really just comes down to consistency, obviously, just like jiu-jitsu. And then if you want to get more scientific or specific about it, that has a very, very important place. But at the same time, if you're prioritizing that over just the sheer consistency, work ethic, and just intensity and training, then you got much bigger missing pieces that the science can't make up for. You know, I think a good example would be the concept of, from a scientific standpoint, leaving 2 to 3 reps in the tank is just as good, if not more beneficial, to build muscle as opposed to going to failure. However, if you don't push to failure, either like me all the time at one point, or at least every so often, you don't have understanding where that is. So your 2 to 3 reps in the tank could easily be an actual 6, and then you're really not getting all that much from the set at all. So there is a time and place, and I do find that's where it's important to have a coach or somebody leading you through that understands that balance between, okay, from a programming standpoint, let's stop at this rep. However, like for this particular set, I'm going to push you so hard so that you understand like what true failure is. So then you have kind of feedback on both ends of the spectrum. Like, okay, we're building this deadlift up, saving 2-3 reps in the tank, but during this accessory movement, if it cable curls, I'm going all out and I'm going until I can't move my arms, so I can understand like where that is for me. And you don't need to do that the next workout going to failure, but you have an understanding where that is, and so it's much easier to gauge where that is later down the road. And then by the time where you're deeper into your 40s or 50s and you probably shouldn't max out all the time, you've done that work, you have this foundation of muscle or strength, so now you can play under the 100% threshold and then still benefit because you're just increasing your longevity at that point.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it's like if you don't know what your 100% is, like you don't know really how many reps you have in reserve. But like it's like you said, like if you get overly scientific and complicated with it, it's actually, like you said, it's pretty easy. Like if you do the basic things right, then you can add a little detail here. Oh, that really works for me if I, fucking eat carbs before training. Some people can be just as strong fasted. You know what I mean? Like little things like that becomes more individual specific, I feel like. And then you can start to play with that little nuance and get like more complex with it, which I enjoy because I just like that stuff. But I feel like if you just keep the basics in it, like you said, like early on, like progressive overload, consistency, things like that. Keep your diet relatively clean or not. But like, you know what I mean? Like if you just do those things for 10 years, like you're going to get strong, you're going to get some muscle, and then you can start adding things onto it.
Yeah, quite literally. Because you could get muscle by eating like shit, and then you could also get muscle by having like complete dog shit form at the same time too. I mean, every commercial gym has it, just the gym bro that just yanks shit around and moves up, but a lot of times those guys are able to put on muscle. So putting on muscle can be done in so many different ways. But yeah, it comes down to eventually, if you're trying to get on a lifting level where you're at in jiu-jitsu, you're going to have to understand the depths of what this thing is. But I actually have a question for you. How do you take the same concept that we're talking about with lifting and apply it to jiu-jitsu from the standpoint of going 100% for whatever that means to you, and then also having that 2 to 3 reps in reserve type mentality in your training?
Yeah. So nowadays, what I've been doing, or at least what we've been doing for the last camp, what I did for the camp for the GP, which was about 9 weeks. So, I had my lifting schedule set up, and I would do that between training sessions just for scheduling. Ideally, I'd like to lift before I even get on the mats at all, so that I'm 100% fresh in the lift, and then I could just do my jiu-jitsu training. But what I'll basically do, because the only reason being is because I'm afraid if I have a jiu-jitsu session, you like if I go from jiu-jitsu, so normally what I would do is I would do a morning jiu-jitsu session, and then I would eat something, and then I'd go straight to the gym and lift. So within like an hour to like an hour and 15 minutes after jiu-jitsu training, I'm in the gym lifting, because then I need to go home, get a new set of clothes, rest for a little bit, go to my next session. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I didn't want to push that time, and then I teach in the evenings.
Right.
So that's just kind of how the schedule lined up for me. And the reason why I would like to do lifting beforehand or way after, like maybe 3 or 4 hours later, is just for the injury risk. Like I don't want to be like trying to push myself on a bench press, even if it's a weight and I notice it. Like I can lift substantially less after training versus if I don't even train at all that day or a couple days. So that's my only thing, is like I don't want to like tear something or like pull something, and then like now I can't push myself in the training room. And when I say push myself, like I'll pick 2 training sessions a week, not like 2 days, but 2 training sessions. Usually they're in the afternoon, and usually it's like, let's say for example, like a Monday or a Tuesday, and then like a Friday or a Saturday, like at some point in the beginning of the week, some point at the end of the week, 3-4 days apart, where it's just like balls out 110%, which means like and not even for the entire session, but for like 2 or 3 rounds. So let's say, you know how we structure the classes at John's, right? So we'll do like a mount round, a turtle round, maybe like a leg lock round, and like 1 or 2 opens. So if I'm doing like a balls out 100% session, I'll probably use the mount round as like a warm-up round. Even though I've been drilling, I'm already sweating, I'll use the mount round as a warm-up round. And then maybe I'll do turtle with like Marigali, because if he's on my back, I know it's going to be a hard round. It's going to be hard to prevent me getting hooks in. I'm defending submissions the whole time. I can push the pace even in a turtle round. Then let's say, for example, I do a cross-ashi round, like a leg lock round. Maybe I'll do that one with Oliver Taza, because I know it's going to be a high pace. He's always very good at catching heels, things like that. He's going to be pushing me in a technical aspect and on a movement aspect. So I get a bigger, stronger guy on my back that is really good at taking the back. So I'm pushing in that aspect, so on a physical and a technical aspect. Then I have to take this guy's back. He's bigger than me. He knows how to defend. He does the same things as me every day, knows all my attacks. So then I have that aspect. So I'm really pushing to hold the back, to strangle, like arms are burning, that kind of thing. Then same thing in the leg lock round. And then an open round, let's say I grab like Luke Griffith. So now I have to like push myself, so that I get 3 hard rounds that I really have to go 100%, where I'm like trying to give nothing. Then, so that's like maybe 2 sessions out of the week. And then on the other days, maybe I have 2 days where I'm like around 80%, right? I'm going like 80%. So I leave 2-3 reps in reserve, that kind of thing, but from a jiu-jitsu perspective. And then I'll have 2 days where I'm really just going through the motions. You know what I mean? It's more of a flow roll. I'm practicing more defense, rolling with people that are smaller than me, trying to work on specific things, and not really trying to get that like my lungs are burning, I feel like I'm gonna die sensation. And that to me has been a lot more sustainable. And also what it does is it gives me just kind of mentally an intention going into my training room, like going into the practice room. Whereas, I don't want to go into the training room and be like, okay, how am I going to train today? Am I going to go hard? Who's in the room? Like, should I train with this guy? Oh, I don't really want to train with that guy. I'm going to avoid. Where it's like today's my hard day. I'm going with this guy no matter what. Today's my easy day. I'm going to do this, that, and the other. Today's a moderate day, you know, and I kind of already mentally know how I'm going to approach it. And that also helps me from a competitive standpoint, because when you're in a competition, like, you don't have a choice. So I can approach it like a hard training session. Like, I know exactly how I want to feel. I know like what I want to eat. I know I want to rest maybe a little bit more that day, maybe not lift, that kind of stuff. So I have the energy to push harder, and that I feel like translates better to not only sustainability, but also, again, I have that, like, I'm mentally geared up for a practice session just the same way that I would mentally gear up for a competition, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. What would you suggest then, say, because so from my experience in Arizona, when I was really focused on jiu-jitsu, Arizona has a fair amount of really good guys, but they're all spread out. So we would all just basically meet whenever our schedules matched. And so that could be 5 days a week on 1 week or 2 days a week, and it's never really predictable. So it's hard to have that planning in regards to your hard day or whatever. And sometimes, like, especially when I was training for ADCC trials and such like that, I would bring in my friends that were ex-Division I wrestlers, and I was basically working around their work schedule. So some days would be really, really hard, like 2 or 3 really hard sessions, because that's when the good jiu-jitsu guys get together and this guy was off work. And then, you know, of course, there'd be days where you just rolling with students is maybe it's not as, like, hard training-wise, but it's hard to predict. Like, is that something where, because I felt as though I would just have to go literally week by week, day by day, and not even have consistency in my schedule, even from a lifting standpoint, just because a day where I didn't expect it to be hard, somebody could be available, and then at that point, well, I'm not going to miss out on rolls with it.
Right.
Like when I trained with Austin back in Arizona all the time, we trained maybe 3 to 4 times a week, and, you know, if he couldn't do a certain day, then I knew I for sure had to make the next day work, but obviously that takes count into my schedule. So for your normal person that doesn't have the luxury of the world-class training partners that you do to be able to choose each day, do you have, like, any advice there?
Yeah, and I always make the distinction, like, are you asking from like a kind of a hobbyist or recreational standpoint, or from like a competitive athlete standpoint?
Yeah. So for me, I guess maybe more competitive.
Okay. Yeah. So one thing I learned a lot from training under Lucas Lepre was he didn't really have very many high level training partners when he first started. Like his, I don't know if you're familiar with him.
I know who he is. I know his story.
So he was primarily in the gi. He's silver medal twice at ADCC, but he was primarily a gi competitor. So he has the most titles at lightweight.
Wow. Okay.
I think he has 6 in the gi and like 4 no gi, something like that. So like 9 or 10 times. Gotcha. But so for like 5 years straight, he was undefeated, and for like, I don't know, 3 or 4 of those years, he never had a point scored on him. So he was like, you know, at that time he was like, so when I was training with him was like kind of in his peak of his career, which I was really lucky to be able to train with him. And he basically, when he started that run, so like I started training with him like maybe when he was like 2 years into that run, just kind of coincidentally, like I was living in Houston at the time, and I had moved around, like traveled to train at a few different places, and my dad was living in Charlotte, which is where Lucas lives, and so I went there to visit my dad, and then it just so happened that he was there, so I trained with him. And then eventually ended up moving there and training there full time at his gym. Yeah. And so basically, like what he would do was he would set the training up to make it harder for him however he could. So for example, and at the time when I was training there, like there was a couple like tough purple belts and, you know, purple to brown belt level guys, but like he was still beating the shit out of everybody. Like he was just they weren't like really challenging him. So what he had to do was like he would take me and like 2 other guys and like, you know, do like Shark Tank rounds or do like groups of 3 and stuff where he was like really pushing himself like from a conditioning aspect. So even though he was beating us, especially in the earlier rounds, as it started to get like, you know, maybe halfway through the training session, now he's getting tired and he's getting like fresh guys in. Now all of a sudden, like, oh, you know, he's getting in trouble. He's getting in a bad position, like things like that. Maybe he's not able to submit guys as easily, you know, and he's pushing himself from like a conditioning standpoint. And what I would realize was happening, because I don't really 100% believe in like conditioning. I never felt that it worked for me. Like when I was training with Lucas, like he used to do all these conditioning workouts, circuits and shit, and I would do them with him. They were just super hard for no reason. Not a lot of rhyme to the reason to the madness. It was just like, in his mind, it was just like, I'm going hard. And all I think that really does is condition your mind and get your mind used to just pushing through that pain. It's not like with lifting where you can see like a specific number going up. So like, oh, this muscle groups are getting stronger. I'm putting on muscle. There's something happening. Like nothing was happening. I was just breathing really hard. So that was the only thing. I was like, and you could do the exact same thing by just grappling really hard. You know what I mean? And it's more specific, you know? And so there, he would do those, but I never really like believed in it. What I think what it is with the conditioning aspect is more so your ability to be efficient with your energy and to use your technique to leverage how hard you can make your opponent work and burn their energy levels out faster than you can burn your own out. Because if you start at 100, you can only go down, right? So you have to learn how to pace and how to like make people work harder than you and things like that. Nobody can sustain 100 for 10, 20 minutes straight. So he would do things like that, and I think that what that did was it allowed him to work, even though people that he was training with weren't as good as him, he was still able to kind of like drill repetitions, but against like a live resisting opponent, because like he could do the moves even when he was tired against guys, because he was just better than them. That's really cool. So I feel like there's a lot of value in that, and most of my training, like I said, I go 2 days a week where I do like 2 really, really hard sessions. But the other times I'm going, like I said, 70 to 80% in terms of intensity, because I can't sustain 100% intensity every single session, or I'll just break my body down. And also I'm not really learning that much. You know, like what I'm learning when I'm doing those hard rounds is what I'm really doing is I'm testing my technique in a tactical, I'm putting my techniques and my tactics together. So I'm really testing that, like, are these strategies going to work against the best guys in the room? The guys that are going to be my hardest training partners, so that I could take those strategies and like what I learned, and I'm like thinking about getting scored on, like things that I'm not usually thinking about when I'm just playing in a technical level. So that's why I say like mentally it just puts me into a competition mode, because in a tournament, like, you don't want to give up scores and things like that. So that's how I use those rounds. But that's how I would train. Like when I was up at Bernardo's and I didn't really have very many training partners, and I was getting some of my best competition results at like brown and early black belt, training that way. And that's kind of like when I first started getting in contact with John and building a relationship with him from filming. And he would tell me similar things too. He was like 1 or 2 days a week, go hard, you and Bernardo. And like there was like one other black belt there that was pretty tough, like really strong dude. Also like big lifter, he had a pretty big deadlift. But like I had those two or three guys that like Bernardo could only train like once or twice a week. So like it was good for me because like I only needed to go hard twice a week. And like the other days I just had my students that were there, and you know, they're training 2 or 3 days a week. They're not going to really push me. And so that's when I started to realize like I don't necessarily need to just go hard in order to get good results in competition. Actually, the contrary is true. At that point, I had already developed that foundation to where now I had to be a little bit more specific with my training. I had to think about it more, like, and teaching was a big part of that, you know, because that's when I started teaching, and I started to actually like, I wasn't just going on, you know, intuition and like reflex. I was going on like, okay, I'm intentionally doing what I want to do. And teaching kind of helped me figure out what it is that I did, like what was my game. You know, I didn't really know that. I would just go, you know. So those were kind of like the key things, I think. Like if you can train with some degree of intention in terms of like the actual skills you're developing, and understand like, you know, in specific positions, like what you're trying to achieve, you know, what are the common reactions, things like that. Now you have a sort of knowledge base and a skill set that, you know, obviously it's going to be sharpened over time. Positional sparring, super important. That really helps a ton. It's probably the most important part, I would say, because you can't just spar from neutral every single day. Like you're not going to really develop skills. So at any skill level, and all skill levels really should train positional sparring, starting a mount position, starting a back position, what leg lock, whatever. You can get creative with it. And then just finding ways to kind of push yourself in the training room. Like everybody has, like one or two training partners that they know, like that's going to be a hard round. It's going to be even, so picking the days where you and that guy agree, like, hey, let's have a hard 10-minute round today. And then on the other days, again, just varying the intensity and trying to be more specific, like doing positional sparring, trying to be more specific with the intention, like what am I looking to work on, and things like that. I think that is going to give you the most, that's going to like leverage your training the most.
Do you announce that like to the person, like, oh, let's go hard today, or like, how do you,
not,
it goes without saying?
I feel like these days in the training room, if I like, me and Nicholas are gonna do a round, unless it's like a mount round, or like we say that we want to go light, or I feel like when the pros grapple with each other, like we know it's gonna be a hard round. Like if I pick any of the guys that are like going to ADCC, for example, it's like, and that are like my weight class, like not maybe not the lighter guys, but like that are my weight class or heavier, I'm gonna push. For like I think they know that.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I agree with you from the concept of the conditioning in jiu-jitsu is predominantly your ability to wear your opponent down rather than your own conditioning. Because if you're training enough, like the conditioning, that base should basically be there nearly automatically.
Yeah.
I think the only argument is, okay, well, if grappling is the best way to condition for grappling, then at what point do you start risking injury? And then at that point, are other modalities in conditioning a better option to supplement? But then I think the way you do it is great because you never necessarily have to step off the mat from a grappling standpoint, but you do have that variability in your intensity that allows your conditioning to slowly build. And as you've been doing it so consistently for so many years, then now like your conditioning it may not jump up like this, but it just slowly builds, and then your knowledge also builds. I think that's what I noticed right away when I had my first couple open rounds with you or Nick or Luke or even Gordon when he came back, is like from a wrestling standpoint, I can go at you guys like this for so long, and then once the knowledge gap starts to hit, then I'm just like under, and then everything after that gets drastically harder. And then I start to learn now with how you guys train and how you guys compete. That's essentially what you want. That's what you're looking for. You're not necessarily looking for like the big blast double at the beginning that makes everyone go ooh. It's like basically like taming me down.
Pressure over
like,
time. Yeah. And the big thing for me is like what I realized with my sport specifically, and I think with combat sports in general, it's like you need to be enough of an athlete that you're not that's not something that that you can hang with everybody else. Like I need to be strong enough that like people aren't going to overpower me. I need to have enough of an athletic, an aerobic base and like anaerobic capacity that like people aren't just going to fatigue me within a few minutes. And especially like in a competition, right? Because then you have adrenaline, you have nerves, like all of a sudden your athleticism is going to go down anyways. So, and I do like some conditioning outside, like we were talking about a little bit before off camera, is like I do some stuff where like I try to get my max heart rate and then bring it down as quickly as I can. So I and that's again, like since you work with like you were talking about working with a coach, since I started doing that, it was a game changer because I can actually see these metrics. And even though I'm not going to necessarily feel, because like I don't necessarily feel anything by like tracking like my resting heart rate, my heart rate recovery, like my average heart rate during cardio sessions, HRV, like things that I track and like I put in like the metrics and things like that. I don't necessarily feel it like, oh, this metric was lower or higher today. Like I don't necessarily feel it in the moment, but I think it's more so like over time. Like I can have confidence that like, okay, if my resting heart rate's going down, it does mean that my conditioning is getting better. Like my whatever cardiac ability. So even though I might not necessarily notice it like on a day-to-day basis, it at least gives me the confidence to know like, okay, I am in good shape, so I can do this. Like I can push that on a physical level. But when I'm actually competing or when I'm actually training, I'm not necessarily trying to be the best athlete. I am an athlete like overall. and I'm always trying to improve my athleticism anywhere that I can, to a degree where like I'm not going to have diminishing returns, to the degree that makes sense. Like that was kind of like when I was really getting into like lifting and powerlifting and stuff like that, like I would do that as a supplement to my training, but I found myself like I was putting so much focus into that wasn't giving me the returns that I wanted to. So I was like, okay, I have to realize, like, is me trying to deadlift more going to make me better? Or am I deadlifting enough that like most people in my weight class can't deadlift that much? Like they probably can't,
Exactly.
you know? So I feel, okay, I'm good there. I'm good there on a strength perspective. Like, let me just maintain that. I wish I could do more. Like my ego wants me to do more, you know, but like I had to kind of like, I have to draw the line somewhere. So that's how I feel like these days. Like I'm not trying to necessarily be the best athlete on the mat, but I'm trying to be an athlete that is just better at jiu-jitsu.
Yeah,
if that makes sense.
I like that a lot, for sure. Because to that deadlift question, I would get asked that a lot. At what point are you deadlifting this much because you think it's going to parlay over into jiu-jitsu? To a certain point, yes. And the easiest way to compare it is if somebody walks in and they start with a 50-pound deadlift and you increase it to 315 over time, inevitably I think their grappling is going to feel a little bit better. However, if you took a 500 deadlift and then brought it to my 750 or whatever, will my jiu-jitsu feel all that better? Like, besides maybe a little bit more of this, probably not. And that's going to last for like 2 seconds before I gas out. You know? So he's a good example of somebody that has a good deadlift or just strength foundation, but he puts more focus into jiu-jitsu, so therefore he's good at jiu-jitsu. Whereas at a certain point for myself, the deadlift number chasing just was purely just that. And if that's your thing, if that's what you like to do, or if you're not him in jiu-jitsu and you kind of like doing both, then there's nothing wrong with that. But I think just being realistic of what the difference is. Like if you're consistently chasing this really high deadlift or whatever number, at a certain point it's just taking energy away that you could be investing in either areas of strength that could still benefit your jiu-jitsu, and or just taking energy away from putting into your jiu-jitsu. Like for me, okay, I deadlift this much now, I think I'm solid. What are some areas of strength that could actually help me in my jiu-jitsu? Well, some of the areas that I'm not as flexible as I want to be yet, because flexibility for me in my rolling makes up for a lot of what I don't know, like being able to bend in certain ways that people don't expect me to. So that's when I started working on that and became a lot more mobile and capable in that sense. So that's where I was very weak there. I was that 50-pound deadlift with my hip flexor mobility. Then I increased that strength, and then actually does play a role in jiu-jitsu, you know, especially from guard and stuff like that. But then even that will hit a point. So if I can do the splits and pick up my foot and put over my head about like a ballerina, I'm probably past the point of where it's going to benefit my jiu-jitsu. I should focus on something else.
And to that point also, one thing that I noticed about strength training is it does make you tighter. So I also felt that I was losing flexibility by trying to get stronger. And so I was like, and I'm not necessarily the most flexible guy just in general, but I definitely think that as much as you want to gain athleticism, you also don't, or the different like flexibility, strength, explosivity, things like that, you also don't want to lose in other areas. So that was another thing that I found myself maintaining is like, okay, I put all this time, maybe it was like 3-4 years where I was really focused on strength training and like only that. And then I was like, okay, I put all this time into this, but like, what about like, how high can I jump on a box? Like, you know, where's my flexibility at? I wanted to make sure that I wasn't losing those areas. So now I kind of like find myself trying to balance all these areas, like where I'm still maintaining my strength. And I want to make sure like if I go into the gym, I know I can hit these numbers. And if I'm struggling at those numbers, I'm like, okay, well, that's a problem. Like I should be able to move that amount of weight on a bench or on a deadlift or whatever, just in general. As long as I'm still able to touch that all the time, I'm comfortable. And it might come a time when I'm like retired from jiu-jitsu where I want to start like putting numbers up more. But
drive me along, I want to be there.
Right, exactly. Yeah, for sure. I'll be older too, so I'll be stronger. Right, that's what they say. But yeah, like I don't want to lose like cardio. I don't want to lose like flexibility, you know, and I don't necessarily want to, because again, like it's hard to say once you get that kind of like baseline athleticism to where like you can hang at a high level, like how much more flexible can I make myself? Like I don't want to change something in my physiology to try to make that my game. Instead, I want to use like, you know, I want to take the actual technical aspect of jiu-jitsu. I want to take that approach and then just apply it to my body, without losing, in certain aspects of like athleticism or flexibility or what have you. That's like kind of a big part of jiu-jitsu, is like there's the science of it, and then there's your physical embodiment of that science.
Yeah, I like that.
So that's a big thing for me.
Yeah, I think so. When it comes to this, you hear about the concept of newbie gains, right? Like the person that starts lifting and then they get a bunch of muscle or strength right away. Even 20 years deep into this, there's parts of training that I can do and have as low-hanging fruit and have that newbie gain response. For me, it was flexibility a couple of years ago.
100%.
And so for me, from a standpoint of, okay, your deadlift is this, so you can be good. Like when I squatted with Larry Wheels the other day, and I was kind of afraid, like, because I kind of came up on a whim, and I haven't squatted since the meet in October, so I was like, God damn, dude, I'm about to like bring my squat up. Like, so I did like 2 squat sessions in 3 days to prepare for that. And I ended up squatting, I ended up squatting the same weight that I did in the competition. So that stayed. So to his point, like you should be able to maintain a certain. If I can maintain that by not doing it, well, then that's kind of like good for me, because then I don't have to keep tearing my body down, right? But then at the same time, okay, what do I not do as much, or what am I not as good at that's going to make me a better overall athlete? And being a better overall athlete for wrestling has a different interpretation than it does for jiu-jitsu. So there's certain things where in wrestling, like running for jiu-jitsu, not really all that necessary. Like to your point, like the cardio stuff to try to, I don't think it's all that necessary. However, like if you look at the sport, so my sport, or whatever you want to call it, is wrestling. So then there's running, there's jumping, there's slamming, there's a lot of different things going on. So me actually like pushing myself to be a better runner does have carryover or jumper or what have you. And then like I said, for my character, you have the flexibility. From a flexibility standpoint, you have the people that are hyper flexible but maybe don't have all that much muscle behind it. So there's like going too far even on the other side of things too. So I think it's important to be able to dictate what that is for yourself. Like what are you overly good at or good enough at, and then be able to like hit that next point. Because in jiu-jitsu, like if you're strong but not mobile and not in good condition, then you have like these 2 big pieces missing. And it's easy because the ego tells you to stick with what you're good at, and I think that's the main issue when it comes to the strength training jiu-jitsu realm, is we hyper-focus on just the strength, but not understanding that strength has so many different definitions. Strength in cardio, strength in mobility, strength in literal strength, right? And so being able to dictate what your weaknesses are, and being like if you did programs based on each weak point for 8 to 12 weeks straight and kept that going, that would be pretty good from a standpoint of trying to even out all these potential weaknesses that you could have as a jiu-jitsu athlete. If you're a lifter coming into jiu-jitsu, whether that's bodybuilding or powerlifting, there's a lot more of that now. There's like memes on powerlifting Instagram where it's like, another day goes by and another powerlifter joins a jiu-jitsu gym or something like that. It's actually kind of funny.
There's a lot of them. I actually ran into Chuck Vogelpohl at like Master Worlds, and he's like a blue belt in Ohio. He trains at a gym that I taught a seminar there in Ohio, and he wasn't at the seminar, but I'm a huge Chuck V fan from like the West Side documentary and stuff, and he's a blue belt, so that's pretty cool. But I wanted to ask you also about the flexibility thing. So when did you really start focusing on flexibility? This is something I was thinking about a couple of days ago. And like I said, like with strength training, I felt like I lost some flexibility. So my first coach in jiu-jitsu, Hillian Gracie, he's a very old school, like Gracie, like he's like Carlos Gracie, like Carlos and Helio. I don't know if you know about the Gracie lineage or whatever, but they're like the 2 brothers, and then they had all these sons. Like on the Helio side, it was like Hickson and Hoyce, and then like on the Carlos side, he had like 20 kids, and Hillian was like the 19th of the 20. Like he was the youngest son.
Do all of them do jiu-jitsu?
Oh yeah. The Gracie family, they all do it. Especially in those days, And so like he was known like in his time and his era of the Gracies of having like the best guard. That's what they used to say. And he was really flexible, so he could like put in a butterfly hook from like weird angles and like things like that. And he was always stretching. Every single day on the mat, he would be stretching, doing the splits. Or those were like his 2 main ones, was like butterfly, and he would push his knees down to the floor, or he would spread his legs and like lean forward and do this one. And he was always stretching, like even just cold, like he was just stretching.
Yeah, really, okay.
And so he would always make me stretch and like make people stretch before and after practice. And he was like, flexibility is so important, blah, 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 this and that. And then, you know, I started working out like relatively young too, like maybe not 5 years old, but like in terms of like the weight room, but like maybe like 12 or 13, something like that. My dad would take me to the gym. And I always found that when I stretched later in life, when I was doing my own lifting and like taking it seriously, like if stretching would make me weaker in the gym if I would do it beforehand. And I felt like I was maybe a little bit at risk of injury. Like if I stretched out, maybe you could pull something. And then I would do it after, and I wouldn't really, I don't know. I just kind of like, at some point I kind of dropped stretching, because I started, some people would be like, oh, stretching is not good for you, blah, blah, blah. Makes your muscles flaccid. Other people, you know, you can injure yourself, blah, blah. So at some point, and I just kind of like got bored of it. Nowadays I kind of stretch, but like I don't like passively stretch, and I think you do something similar. Like you kind of do more like an active type stretch. Like even when I used to do, like I would like kind of sporadically do yoga classes, and I never really liked like when they would just like make you like passively sit there and stretch in like this like long range of motion for like, you know, minutes at a time. I liked it more when it was like, you know, you had to hold something and like your muscles were like on fire, but you were like pushing through a range of motion. And my brother explained this to me recently. He's really into like functional patterns. And he calls it pendiculation. I guess there's like an actual word for that, like what you see cats and dogs do, where they're like firing everything, but it looks like they're stretching, and they kind of are, but they're like tense. And basically his philosophy, and this makes a lot of sense, is like, let's say for example you wanted to stretch your bicep. He believes that you shouldn't just passively stretch the bicep, but like there should still be tension in the muscle, but it should be as a result of the contraction of the opposing muscle. And that made a lot of sense to me. And I was just wondering like what your kind of philosophy was behind that, and like how do you like basically within ranges of motion maintain strength? Because I feel like I can, let's say for example I'm doing like a fly motion, like I don't do flies because they just freak me out, like this like stretching motion. But like I know for a fact, like if I just stretch and I can stretch like and get my arm all the way behind and I get like a good pec stretch, I probably wouldn't be able to do that with like a weight. You know what I mean? Without injuring myself. Or almost like that preacher curl. You know, you see people get themselves torn in those positions. So I was wondering how you approach that to where you can still be strong and like not get injured, but increase your range of motion again to like where you're not having diminishing returns.
Yeah. So the way you put it and your brother put it, that's basically right on point with how I think about it. I just probably take it to a more extreme example, just because of the love of bodybuilding or powerlifting and doing those movements. So from a mobility standpoint, yes, I'm only more recently have I gotten into more passive stretching as a supplement to my active stretching or my loaded stretching that I do in training, because it does have a time and place. Like if your goal is pure flexibility, like if your goal is literally just to split, you could have aspects of both and see progress because of it. But for jiu-jitsu, I wouldn't necessarily say that you would gain any more passively stretching than you would actively stretching or loaded stretching, because jiu-jitsu is all loaded stretching basically. So like if you are put into a compromised position, you're being stretched and you're being loaded. So that's where some of the movements, such as like a long range lunge where I'm like holding weight or supporting my body weight and actively contracting my, let's say I'm working my hip flexor, the antagonist muscle there, like you said, the opposing muscle is going to be like my glute. Or if I'm trying to strengthen my bicep in a long range of motion, I talk about this bicep curl all the time, like defending an arm bar, right? Like, or being able to hold out from an arm bar. You have the concept of short range strength and end range strength. So from a bodybuilding perspective, you see a lot of like curls like this. And like building muscle, it works, and building strength, it works, and it gets a pump and all that good stuff. However, a lot of those bicep tears you see come from doing a lot of this, and then maybe fatigue or whatever kicks in, they go a little bit longer, and then, you know, that happens. So in regards to that, it's like, yeah, if I do a pec fly, or if I do an arm or a bicep curl this far out, I'm probably not going to be able to do any amount of weight that's going to actually make my arm bigger or stronger. But if I take the time up front to take a 5-pound weight and literally do sets of 20 or 30, I built that up over time to being able to hit an 80 for 2. Not that that's necessary by any means. But I take that short range strength that I originally had and then got my end range strength to match up to that, because like you basically go all the way back to the beginning. there's like this long range pec fly that I do where I started with like 2.5 or 5, and I just hold that position like 2-3 seconds, and like when you're actively contracting, the muscle is technically shortening, but you're forcing it to lengthen, so it elicits a stimulus that's going to encourage your body to actually be able to bear more load when it's lengthened like that. So then from a jiu-jitsu standpoint, you don't want to get in those positions, but whenever you do, you're a little bit more capable than you were had you not expose your body to some load in a controlled environment.
Yeah.
So there's like the concept of, loaded stretching, where should you take your max dumbbell press and try to like go past here if you're not ready for it? No, you shouldn't do that. But you can, if you find an appropriate load, to just do something isometrically. A lot of the loaded stretching that I do nowadays is just isometric loading, where I'm just trying to hold something with some sort of external load, whether that's my body weight or loaded weight. But there's so many ways, and it could be an entirely different podcast where we just talk about the various ways to take a loaded stretch and then regress it to a point to where you might have to passively kind of stretch at first, but then you work to loading that. If you're trying to get your hamstrings to mobilize and lengthen, then you want to focus on being able to flex your quad to get the hamstring to lengthen and actively contract. Because I think that type of stimulus is what tells your body that it's okay to get into these ranges of motion. But because they're actively contracting, and if they are bearing load, it's communicating to your body that now not only is it okay to get in this range of motion, passive, but it's also okay to get strong here, because if we're here all the time, we're going to have to put strength on it in order to allow you to consistently get here and build strength over time. And on top of that, when you think of tightness, like people talk about having tight hips or tight shoulders, the thing that helped me the most in regards to mobility is translating the word tightness and just basically making it a synonym of weakness. Mm-hmm. And so if you understand tightness as weakness, then the equation becomes way more simple. You just need to get stronger. Mm-hmm. Your body's generally tight unless there's some pre-existing injury, but your body's generally tight because that's basically its way of protecting you from getting injured, right? Like, so it creates tightness so you don't get into a range of motion that will actually cause injury. Mm-hmm. But if you start communicating to your body slowly over time with really light load, say it's okay week after week, your body will start to agree with that concept and allow you to get a little bit farther back. And that's just how I've been able to kind of maintain my muscle mass, but then slowly over time add to the flexibility while still keeping my strength level up, because the strength training and bodybuilding training never necessarily changed. I just added in a little bit more range of motion on particular movements, or added in certain exercises that have allowed me to still elevate all three aspects.
So is this like 15 minutes after a hard session? So say you're working chest, you're like, all right, I'm going to take 15 minutes to do these loaded stretches, kind of go through, now that the nervous system's kind of taxed and is used to contracting. Is that how you're sprinkling that in? Like in your programming, like every day you're doing some type of loaded?
Great question. I don't know if there was a right or wrong necessarily, or something that's scientifically better, but a lot of times I'll just do it within the workout itself. So if I'm doing a push, then if it's dumbbells, I might use those dumbbells to go like deeper and like load that movement. And like even something as a full range of motion, like dumbbell press, you can argue over time will increase your shoulder ability, your power or strength with your shoulder and deep extension like this. But obviously that takes progression. So like if you're really strong but not that mobile yet, but you still want to have that aspect of strength or even building muscle, you might have those movements at the beginning where you're not going into these deep ranges of motion, you're just focusing on contraction and weight, but then parlay off into your mobility movements that are weighted maybe at the end. But if you get to a point to where, like I talked about, like your end range strength and your short range strength are much more on an even playing scale, you might be able to just conjoin them together. And so then you maintain a foundation of strength and mobility simultaneously. But for me, to conclude, a lot of times after I hit whatever my main movement is, then I'll get into my loaded stretching movements. And now that I've gotten the strength level up in those movements, they also are adding into the hypertrophy and strength and all that
my
too.
question. So that used to be an old like bodybuilding thing where it's like, you stretch out, you kind of see it in Flex magazine.
Right.
So kind of going back to it, do you notice now that there's more mobility, more range of motion with the muscle that just helps hypertrophy, just basically everything that you can achieve?
Right, exactly. exactly. Because scientifically, if you can achieve more range of motion, stretch a muscle, load it in that lengthened position, then that is what scientifically is talked about to elicit the most muscle hypertrophy from a bodybuilding standpoint. The only problem is if you're not mobile enough to get into the most lengthened position for that particular muscle, now you're staying within a finite range of motion and working with the potential imbalances there, or you have to take all the time it takes to get to the point to where you can even do this safely. And then to answer your question, I guess it's best to just take some time up front to even things out, in my opinion, so that your chances of injury decrease, but also you're able to take advantage of those deep ranges of motion. I think an example would be like a pull down or a pull up, where a lot of times people's shoulders are really tight, so they can't protract here at the top. But if I'm able to do this and my lat is inevitably getting a deeper stretch, right? But then sometimes we stay here. But if you try to go here, then it's really uncomfortable if you don't train this all that much. Yeah. But being able to get to this point from the stretching argument of hypertrophy, then technically, your lat's stretching more, so it's in a deeper range of motion. You're loading the muscle while it's lengthened, so then you could argue that you're getting more muscle gain out of it. I don't know. This is all up in the air. This is just what I've seen, from studies. Yeah. But this is in theory, yes, increasing the range of motion over time should allow you to put on more muscle, because now you can get into deeper ranges of motion without the diminishing returns of pain or discomfort.
Yeah, because you mentioned Mike Israetel before. He talks about that all the time, the full range of motion. And for me, you made that armbar analogy. I literally would notice when I was doing so last year I spent a lot of time trying to put on a little bit of muscle, and I was doing more bodybuilding style workouts, like bicep curls and just throwing the weight around. Yeah. But if I would do an armbar round and somebody would armbar me, my arm would be out to here, and I'd be like, oh shit, it's not even my elbow, it's my bicep is gonna tear. Right. It was so tight. Yeah. So then I started to pull back on the weight and really focus on do I have tension at the bottom. And then contraction. One thing that I've noticed that's helped me a lot with that, to where I feel I don't get as tight and sore and where I feel I can't move with when I lift, is obviously I'm not just I want to be a certain level of strength in a specific movement, because strength is very specific, right? You can be very strong in a quad extension, doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be strong in a squat, that kind of thing, But I want to be able to maintain the strength in those kind of bigger muscles in those areas within a certain range, So and one thing that I've been trying to do is we were talking about the antagonistic muscle is let's say for example this is the quad extension example. If I extend my quad, when I go down for the negative, I want to maintain tension in the quad, controlling the negative. But I actively try to make sure that my hamstrings are on, because I'm almost doing a hamstring curl. So I kind of think about it that way, or even the opposite, whereas that's not maybe the primary muscle that's being taxed, but I want at least that antagonistic muscle to be involved in the movement, because I don't want to just be here and then dropping it, here and then dropping it. I want to be able to control it and fire that antagonist.
I like that.
And I've noticed that has helped me with being able to control a weight in a longer range of motion. Okay. Specifically even with quad extensions, I like to get the quad extension as far back as I can. Yeah, so I can really get as far into it as I can, and also so that I'm not super freaking tight. Yeah. You know what I mean? From just lifting heavy and an idiot.
I think that's my biggest complaint of most quad extension machines, is that most of them literally start right here.
It's the worst.
Yeah, it's really annoying. The main way to find the middle ground of that is to slide forward a little bit, so that your hips a little bit more lengthened. But even still, there's quad machines that have literally I've tried and almost brings your foot all the way back. It's great, but it's few and far between. They have some.
Yeah, the single leg ones. Okay, you get that leg all the way back. You can adjust. And you get that full range of motion that you want.
I got a Lifetime, and they have 2 quad extension machines, and one of them is terrible, because it's starts you out here. The other one's okay. It doesn't get me as far back as I would want to go, but it gets me far enough back. And if it's busy, I'm just I can almost never get a workout done, because it's that one machine, and it's always the shitty one that's free. And I'm I don't want to use that
one. Yeah, no, I can see that.
It's funny how you with time too. I get nitpicky about the machines that I want to use. Yeah. Where early on I never even thought about that. I'm every squat rack's the same, and now I'm just I don't really like this brand squat rack.
Yeah, no,
as opposed to other ones,
So true. So true. Yeah, bars, squat racks.
Yeah.
Machines, everything.
Jimmy, I did have a question for you, just like on the business side.
Yeah.
Again, I know you from social media, and then when you walked into the gym, I literally just said, "Oh my God, you're the biggest Filipino man alive." I know who you are exactly.
Thanks, man, I appreciate it.
Because there isn't a lot really. There's basically that Jeremy Bonaya guy that was there, and then basically you. But my question kind of comes from how did you align yourself with like all these just major strength coaches that you see online now, like your Phil DeRue's, your Mark Bell's, the Neo Vito guy, Mike Israetel, Bart Kwan, the Genbaru guy, like literally just up there. Like, how did that all come about? Like, did you guys meet at like the Arnold and stuff? Like, can you talk to me about how that kind of all came about?
Yeah, it's all very interesting. I appreciate that a lot. So I spent my later teens, earlier 20s just idolizing and wanting to basically collaborate or do the same things as a lot of these people that you're mentioning, whether it's from a YouTube perspective or a branding perspective or whatever the case may be. And so the thing that initially sparked all that was when I started going to CT Fletcher's events and doing his Iron Wars events, and then cultivating a relationship with CT. CT is the person that essentially put in a good word for me for Goldberg to now build a friendship there.
Is that how you met Goldberg?
Yeah,
That's
well,
cool.
I had connected with him on Instagram before CT had talked to him, but then when he saw CT and I were friends, he had asked him about me. CT said some really nice things, and now I get to go to Goldberg's house every weekend, so it's cool.
That's awesome.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that. So then now how that parlays into everything else, I think CT is such a huge person or figure in my journey personally, because he was like the first big name that I got to connect with and the first big name to really believe in me. And then so after that, having that credential of being associated with CT to some degree then made people like Mark Bell want to have me on their podcast for the first time. And I will say that after I was on Mark Bell's podcast the first time, that was like my initial spark to meeting the majority of these people, because a lot of those people saw me from Mark Bell or something to that extent. And then after that, then I just started really learning how networking is just this domino effect, and you network with one person and that person sees, and as long as you preach the right things, you have some good morals to stand on, and you're talking to the right people, then it just kind of like continues to build. But yeah, it's crazy because I remember being 18, 19-year-old powerlifter wearing the slingshot stuff and having the knee sleeves and everything, and then being able to be on his podcast, that was really cool. And then I remember seeing the Barbell Brigade stuff online, and then going into like doing photo shoots for their clothes and whatnot. And I even Eugene, the Gambaru, it was funny because my ex-girlfriend at the time, she pulled up a picture of him, like he had like really long, beautiful Asian hair. Yeah. She's like, look at this guy's hair. And then little did I know that 8 years later I'd be collaborating with him on his app, just weird things like that. So, and kind of the same thing has now happened in the wrestling world and even in the jiu-jitsu world to some degree. So I don't know. I think I'm just I live a blessed life, and God helps me get to where I need to go. Yeah, but that's kind of where it all started.
CT Fletcher, eh?
Yeah,
wow.
CT helped me a lot for sure.
Did you go to him for training, or you just kind of met him at a...
Just literally, yeah. So he holds this Iron Wars event every year, and basically it's just kind of like this big mosh pit of like lifters that he just kind of brings in to lift heavyweight. And then after the first time, then we started connecting on Instagram. He followed me or whatever. He actually went to my first trials, ADCC 2019 West Coast.
Oh, nice.
I'm actually the person that introduced CT to Gordon.
That's awesome.
That's how they became friends. And then CT was on a podcast with Flo like shortly after that, because CT was there to watch me, and then Gordon was a big fan of him, and then so Gordon came over and I was like, hey CT, this is like the go-to grappling. I'm like, oh, praise the king. And he's like, CT.
Was that during COVID? He was on the Flow podcast, I think.
Yeah,
they were bringing a bunch of people on during that time.
Shortly after. Yeah. It was actually it was.
I remember that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then I remember Gordon was like, you're there supporting your friend. What was his name? Jimmy House.
Yeah. Oh hell yeah, that's awesome.
So, anyways, but CT has done a lot for me when he hasn't had to, and he's inevitably kind of the first person to show me that I can be that guy. I can be different, and he's given me a lot of motivation to continue chasing these goals and see myself as somebody pursuing that same level of greatness that he's achieved, or any of these people that you bring up. Just I don't see myself as necessarily lesser anymore. I see myself as inspired to be on these people's level. So it's cool to be around people like Giancarlo and everything like that, like from a day-to-day basis, getting to train Nick, and it's brought my level up a lot. Not even literally jiu-jitsu, but just in life and the different things that I perceive. Like when you're around people like this day to day, like you just naturally like advance levels that you never thought you could. So just in general, I'm very grateful to be here in Austin around you guys, and I appreciate the opportunity to be on here. I looked up to Giancarlo for a long time because once upon a time when I was a little bit more passionate about jiu-jitsu, like he was essentially like the GOAT of the weight class, and like just seeing him and studying his stuff was something that I did a long time. So this is kind of full circle for me. So I appreciate you, brother. Friendship.
I appreciate you. Yeah, thank you.
Cool. Yeah, thank you.
Dude, glad you could be on here. We should do it again. I know you got to get going soon. But let's definitely do it again.
Yeah,
for sure.
And
good stuff.
If you want to be on mine, I'd be honored to have you as my first
guest. Yeah, for sure. No, let's do a workout for sure. That'd be badass.
Hell yeah. Let's do it.
And a podcast whenever you start it.
Thank you. I appreciate that a
You
lot.
can see a workout and sushi eating contest.
Right,
I'd be down.
I was telling them about that. I'm like, I'd love to see that.
Let's
go
do
to
that.
Bang Bang and just like, who eats more?
Just smash some food, yeah.
We should all do that.
Then I'll miss weight at ADCC.
But Jamie, I just want to say like, being Filipino, I know that's in your butt. Really, being a Filipino Asian guy like to come see, and I feel like fitness-wise, like you're it.
Thank you. And wrestling too. Thank you.
Yeah, wrestling. We're Filipino kids or whatever, but it's like it's cool to see, man. And I think it's important. And I'm really impressed with what you do.
It is a lot. I really appreciate that. Thank you. Thank you so much.
I'm excited to see the pro wrestling stuff come out.
Thanks, man. I really appreciate it.
Hopefully next time we do this, we'll have some cool wrestling stories.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Yeah.
And I think I should be getting some more work in Austin. Hopefully that'll be fun. Yeah, thank you guys.
Before we take off, anything you want to, like anything coming up, anything you want to plug?
Yeah, if you guys are in Phoenix, I have my first wrestling event May 18th in Mesa. If you guys are interested in coaching, whether it's for jiu-jitsu or strength training, you just want to transform your body, you guys can follow me on Instagram at Coach Jimmy House or apply online at my website, jimmyhouse.com. Thank you guys for the opportunity. It's a pleasure. Big fan.
Yeah.
Love you, bro. Salamat.
Dude, that was awesome.
Yeah. Thanks, guys. That
Fuck
was
yeah.
awesome. So good. I wish you had more time.
I know, yeah, same.
That's smart, though. Yeah, man. That's cool.
That was a great podcast.
Thanks, dude. I appreciate that. Yeah, dude. It's an honor. Truly. I've been a fan for a long time, man. Well before I knew you.
Thank you.
Yeah, dude. I'm happy for you and all the things you're doing, dude.
Yeah, definitely. Let's get a workout in though at some point before you leave.
I love that. So yeah, I mean, I could do it as early as next week. Do you prefer a specific one? Like,
I'm back Monday, so any time after Tuesday.
okay, let's check out Los.
Where?
The Los location near White.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
We could do that.